Hello, everybody, and greetings from my home studio at my apartment on Cook Street. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about Carmen and the extraordinary position it has in the context of popular culture. Now, opera being part of popular culture is certainly nothing new. I guess one of the main signposts of this is it took place in 1728 when John Gay and Christopher Pepusch put together The Beggar's Opera, which was not composed. It was a pastiche made up of songs that were being whistled in the streets around the theaters where Handel put on his operas, and in fact, some of the tunes were from Handel's operas. They'd become so popular that people were singing and whistling them in pubs and plazas. And Mozart found the same thing several decades later when he visited Prague, and the tunes from The Marriage of Figaro were being sung at cafes and on boulevards throughout that city. So everybody, for example, will have heard this piece. This has nothing to do with Carmen, but it will certainly remind you of a popular operatic tune that's been used in many, many, many different ways. Now, you've all heard that before. Can you imagine that there are people who would whistle that and perhaps even sing it with some words that could be quite ribald, who don't even know it's from an opera? It's how popular, how embedded it is in our culture. Well, Carmen has not one but two such tunes. Of course, the Habanera, which has a bass line and a popular tune. And the famous Toreador song. And these have been used in such a wide variety of ways that I'm only going to touch on a few of them. And the reason that I was so interested in this topic is because of a childhood memory. When I would have been not even 11 yet, in October of 1966, an episode was aired of the popular sitcom called Gilligan's Island. And I don't think Gilligan's Island has been off the air in the intervening 50 odd years that it has been around. And they had a special guest on the island played by Phil Silvers, a producer named Harold Hecuba. And the castaways on Gilligan's Island decided to impress this producer and give a kind of showcase to Ginger. I'm assuming you all know Gilligan's Island well enough to know who I'm talking about when I mention Ginger, the glamorous Hollywood movie star. And they produce a musical version of Hamlet. Now, it must be admitted that they used some music from the Tales of Hoffmann as well, but the two show-stopping numbers are the Habanera, which is sung by Gilligan as I ask to be or not to be, and that is the question that I ask of me. So there we get the famous Carmen Habanera. And then later on, in playing the role of Polonius, is the skipper, who sings to his son Laertes, played by Marianne. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, do not forget, stay out of debt. This is perfectly sage and good advice. But the spectacle of this in the context of that particular popular series has always stuck with me. And you can certainly visit YouTube and see both of those excerpts from Gilligan's Island. And what could demonstrate the popularity of an opera more than its finding immortality in that particular sitcom? Now, Carmen, of course, very famously when it was first produced, was not a huge hit. It was not a spectacular failure either. It ran a fairly respectable number of performances, but it was criticized. It was not particularly accepted in the venue in which it was first produced, the Opéra Comique, which was certainly used to having operetta-style musical theater pieces in which there was a happy ending, in which there were princes and princesses, and if there was a gypsy, he or she would always really be a prince or a princess in disguise. And the idea of a gritty, down-to-earth story of working-class people and the angst-ridden lives that they lead was not something that people were really quite willing to accept at the Opéra Comique. And anyone who knows the story of Carmen knows that it doesn't end comically, it ends tragically. So Bizet did not himself live long enough to know even how popular Carmen would be. In the context of great classical composers, I always find it interesting that this opera was a great favorite of Johannes Brahms, who apparently saw it no fewer than 21 times. So it has its position in all areas of culture. Now, a long time ago, 1998, I had the great pleasure of playing for lessons that were given to our wonderful mezzo-soprano Susan Platz by the great German mezzo-soprano Christa Ludwig. This happened at Ravinia, the summer home of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, where Madame Ludwig was giving master classes. Susan was her sort of guest private student. Appearing at Ravinia in the same part of the summer festival, the same year, 1998, was Harry Belafonte. And as Madame Ludwig talked about Harry Belafonte over lunch, it became very clear that she thought he was quite easy on the eye back in the day, and she was a fan of one of his first films, Carmen Jones. Carmen Jones is a sort of updated setting of the story. It uses the score in new orchestrations and with new lyrics. The whole project was part of the imagination of Oscar Hammerstein II. And in fact, he thought of this before he even started working on Oklahoma with Richard Rodgers. And it was a pet project he felt incredibly passionate about. Resetting the story from Spain to the American South, the African American South, during the Second World War. So we have Joe instead of Don Jose. And we have, instead of the toreador, a bullfighter, we have a prize-winning boxer. And Carmen herself is described, I can't resist this, on Wikipedia, she's described as a shameless vixen. Now, very famously, this was a success on Broadway. It had reviewers scrambling for superlatives, and then it became a film directed by Otto Preminger and starring the great Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge had a difficult career and an untimely end to her life, but she was a very, very popular nightclub singer as well as a wonderful first-rate actress and singer. And she played the central role of Carmen. One of her friends, called Freddie, was played by Pearl Bailey. And on the YouTube links, you can see Pearl Bailey singing this number from Carmen. Beat out that rhythm on the drum, she sings. And it's got some fantastic choreography, so I do urge you to go to see it. And we also have, in a very good example of mid-20th century lyric adaptation, Oscar Hammerstein's take on the Habanera, sung by Dorothy Dandridge. Amongst the YouTube links, I've also left you a clip of Dorothy Dandridge singing in a nightclub. She sings at the Velvet nightclub in 1953, 1 year before the release of Carmen Jones as a film. She sings a song from an immortal musical called Cabin in the Sky. This song is called Taking a Chance on Love. Again, it has nothing to do with Carmen, but it gives you a glimpse of the career of Dorothy Dandridge as a popular entertainer. Carmen Jones is well worth seeing. One of the things we'd hope to do is to actually give you a showing of it as part of the whole Carmen production experience, but you can go on YouTube and catch those couple of links. Now, if we think of Gilligan's Island as being one of the, well, it's either one of the apexes or one of the nadirs of popular culture, depending on your point of view, we can move forward to the 70s and 80s now and look at the Muppets and Sesame Street. And we're going to have a chance to see one of the great Escamillos, one of the great singers of our time, Mr. Samuel Ramey, indicating how important the letter L is to him in a revised version of the Toreador song. Again, something to look for on YouTube. Something a little bit more puzzling, bewildering, and perhaps even ingenious to me is a Sesame Street creation in which an orange is dressed up by a number of little kitchen gadgets to look very glamorous and very much like a nightclub entertainer, and goes ahead and sings the Habanera. Have a look at that as well. The Habanera, however, finds, I think, one of its most imaginative recreations in the Muppets. Now, those characters that you're going to hear in the Muppets, if you go to the YouTube clip, are Swedish Chef and Beaker. So they're not among the most characteristic and the most famous of the Muppets characters, but you can go and have a look at how the Habanera becomes a kind of vocalese. And when I say vocalese, I mean sort of like the Swingle Singers crossed with Manhattan Transfer, except with no instrumental accompaniment. Well worth a trip. And finally, the place that this opera plays in the more popular elements of classical music. Carmen has provoked composers like Sarasate to write variations and fantasias on its many, many attractive tunes. And these generally find their way into the repertoires of supremely virtuosic performers. One of these is somebody who took it upon himself to actually create a piano fantasy or variation based on one of the famous songs, the one that Pearl Bailey sang. And this is Vladimir Horowitz. And there are versions of this played by incredibly superb pianistic legends today like Yuja Wang, and it's unassailably great. But there's something so magical and special about the 65-year-old Horowitz playing his Carmen variation at Carnegie Hall, 1968. So please drop in and have a look at that too. And that will give you, I think, a really good idea of the place Carmen has held in popular culture. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next Opera Motifs. Bye for now.